Hello, everyone. Welcome to English Insights. Today, we will explore the story of the Kennedy family, one of the most powerful families in American history. They were rich, successful, and often called America's royal family. But behind the fame came sadness, accidents, and many shocking deaths. So people began to call it the Kennedy family curse. Why did so many Kennedys face tragedy? Was it just bad luck or something more mysterious? These questions have fascinated people for decades. In this video, we will learn about their rise, their successes, and the painful events that shaped their legacy. This is also a great chance to improve your English listening skills while discovering an unforgettable story. Part 1. The Rise of the Kennedy Family. The story of the Kennedy family begins with Joseph P. Kennedy, the father. He was born in 1888 to an Irish-American family in Boston. At that time, Irish immigrants often faced discrimination. But Joseph Kennedy was smart, ambitious, and determined to succeed. Joseph studied hard, went to Harvard University, and soon began a career in banking and business. He made money in many industries: the stock market, movies, real estate, and alcohol after Prohibition. By the 1930s, he was one of the richest men in America. Joseph was not only rich, he also wanted power. He entered politics and served as the U.S. ambassador to Britain before World War II. Even after he left that position, he kept his focus on politics. He had a dream. One of his sons would become President of the United States. The Kennedy family grew up with wealth, education, and strong expectations. Joseph and his wife Rose had 9 children. They were raised in a strict but supportive home. The children were taught to work hard, to compete, and to aim for success. Sports, religion, and education played a big part in their lives. The Kennedy sons were sent to the best schools and were trained for leadership. The daughters also received a good education, which was unusual for women at that time. From the outside, the family looked perfect, rich, attractive, and full of promise. By the 1940s, the Kennedys had become known across the country. Newspapers often showed pictures of the smiling family sailing, playing football, or attending church. They represented the idea of the American dream, a family that had risen from immigrant roots to wealth and influence. But with power came high expectations. Joseph Kennedy pushed his children to achieve greatness. He told them that failure was not an option. For the Kennedy family, success was not just personal, it was part of their duty to the nation. The rise of the Kennedys seemed like a fairy tale, but soon tragedy would begin to strike, and the idea of a curse would take shape. Part 2. The First Tragedies. Even as the Kennedy family rose to wealth and power, shadows began to fall. The first tragedies struck not long after Joseph Kennedy had built his dream of a powerful dynasty. One of the most painful stories was that of Rosemary Kennedy, the eldest daughter. Rosemary was different from her brothers and sisters. She had learning difficulties and struggled in school. In the 1940s, people did not understand such conditions well, and families often felt ashamed. Joseph Kennedy wanted Rosemary to live a normal life, but he also worried that her behavior might hurt the family's public image. In 1941, without telling the rest of the family, Joseph approved a new medical procedure called a lobotomy. Doctors believed it could calm people with mental or emotional problems, but the operation was experimental and very risky. Sadly, it went terribly wrong. Rosemary was left unable to speak clearly or live independently. She spent the rest of her life in institutions, away from the public. For the Kennedys, this was a secret pain, and many later called it the first curse of the family. Another tragedy came during World War II. Joseph Kennedy's eldest son, Joseph P. Kennedy Jr., was a bright and brave young man. He was seen as the one who would fulfill his father's dream of a Kennedy presidency. In 1944, while serving as a Navy pilot, Joe Jr. volunteered for a dangerous mission in Europe. His plane, loaded with explosives, exploded in the air before reaching its target. He was killed instantly. He was only 29 years old. The death of Joe Jr. was a huge blow to the family. Joseph Kennedy had always expected his eldest son to become president one day. Now, that dream was gone. The responsibility shifted to his second son, John F. Kennedy, who would later carry the hopes of the entire family. The tragedies of Rosemary and Joe Jr. were deeply painful. They showed that even a family as rich and powerful as the Kennedys could not escape suffering. To the outside world, the Kennedys still looked glamorous and successful, but inside, they carried scars of loss and sorrow. These early tragedies set the stage for what people would later call the Kennedy family curse. They were only the beginning of a long series of accidents, deaths, and heartbreaks that would follow the family through the decades. Part 3: John F. Kennedy and the Presidency. After the death of Joseph Kennedy Jr., the family's hopes turned to the second son, John Fitzgerald Kennedy, often called JFK. He was smart, charming, and handsome. Though he suffered from health problems, including chronic back pain, he showed courage and determination. JFK entered politics after World War II, first as a congressman, and then as a senator from Massachusetts. He quickly became popular with voters. People liked his energy, his speeches, and his vision for America. In 1960, he ran for president against Richard Nixon. The campaign was hard-fought, but Kennedy won, becoming the youngest elected president in U.S. history at only 43 years old. The Kennedy presidency soon became known as the Camelot era. This was a reference to the legendary kingdom of King Arthur, full of hope and romance. With his elegant wife, Jacqueline Kennedy, and their young children, JFK brought a new image to the White House. The Kennedys looked like America's royal family, stylish, modern, and full of promise. JFK faced serious challenges as president. He dealt with the Cuban Missile Crisis, which brought the world close to nuclear war. He also spoke about civil rights, calling for equality for Black Americans. His speeches inspired millions with phrases like, "Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for your country." But this bright era ended in tragedy. On November 22, 1963, President Kennedy was riding in a motorcade in Dallas, Texas. Crowds lined the streets to see him. Suddenly, gunshots rang out. JFK was struck and fatally wounded. He was only 46 years old. The assassination shocked the entire world. People cried in the streets. Television showed the sadness of a nation in mourning. Leaders across the globe paid tribute to Kennedy as a symbol of hope and youth. For the Kennedy family, the pain was unbearable. Jacqueline Kennedy, now a widow, became an icon of strength as she stood beside her husband's coffin. Their young children, John Jr. and Caroline, saluted their father at the funeral. A heartbreaking image remembered forever. The death of John F. Kennedy added another layer to the idea of a Kennedy curse. Here was a family that had reached the very top of American power, only to be struck down in the most public and tragic way possible. Even today, the assassination of JFK remains one of the most shocking events in U.S. history. It was not just the loss of a president, but also the end of America's Camelot. The hope that surrounded the Kennedys was forever touched by sadness. Part 4. Robert Kennedy and More Loss. After John F. Kennedy's assassination in 1963, the family turned to another son, Robert F. Kennedy, often called Bobby. He was strong, intelligent, and deeply loyal to his family. Like his brother, he had a passion for politics and a belief in public service. Robert first gained national attention as the Attorney General in his brother's government. He fought against organized crime and supported civil rights. Many Americans admired his courage and his sense of justice. After JFK's death, Bobby became a symbol of hope for those who still believed in the Kennedy dream. In 1964, Robert was elected as a senator from New York. Over the next few years, he became one of the most popular politicians in the country. He spoke out against poverty, racism, and the Vietnam War. Crowds followed him everywhere, cheering his speeches and shaking his hand. To many, he looked like the natural successor to his brother. By 1968, Robert Kennedy decided to run for president. His campaign was full of energy. Young people, minorities, and working-class voters supported him with great enthusiasm. He promised unity, peace, and a better future for America. For a moment, it seemed that the Kennedy dream might rise again. But then tragedy struck once more. On the night of June 5, 1968, after winning the California Democratic primary, Robert Kennedy gave a victory speech in Los Angeles. As he walked through a hotel kitchen, a gunman opened fire. Robert was shot several times. The next day, he died in the hospital at only 42 years old. The news devastated the nation. Once again, Americans watched in shock as another Kennedy was taken by violence. The image of Robert's wife, Ethel, standing by his hospital bed with their children waiting at home, was heartbreaking. Just as with John F. Kennedy, the funeral was broadcast worldwide. Millions mourned the loss of a leader who had promised hope and change. For the Kennedy family, it was almost unbearable. Within just 5 years, 2 brothers had been assassinated while serving their country. Joseph Kennedy, the father, had once dreamed of seeing his sons in the White House. Now, 2 of them were dead, and the dream had become a nightmare. The death of Robert Kennedy strengthened the belief in a Kennedy family curse. To many people, it seemed impossible that so many tragedies could happen to one family by chance. The Kennedys had power, money, and fame, but also an unending chain of sorrow. By the end of the 1960s, the Kennedys were no longer only America's royal family. They had become symbols of both greatness and grief. Their story was no longer just about success. It was about loss, heartbreak, and the mystery of fate. Part 5. Later Generations and Continuing Tragedies. After the deaths of John and Robert Kennedy, the family tried to move forward. The remaining brother, Edward Ted Kennedy, carried the political torch. He served for decades as a senator and became one of the most powerful voices in American politics. But even his life was touched by scandal and sorrow. In 1969, Ted Kennedy was involved in the Chappaquiddick accident. Late at night, his car went off a bridge and into the water. A young woman named Mary Jo Kopechny, who was with him, drowned. Ted escaped, but he did not report the accident right away. The scandal damaged his reputation, and although he remained a senator, it ended his chance of becoming president. The curse seemed to continue in the next generations. In 1984, David Kennedy, the son of Robert, died of a drug overdose at only 28 years old. In 1997, another son of Robert, Michael Kennedy, died in a skiing accident. Each loss added to the sense that tragedy followed the family, no matter what they did. The most famous of the later tragedies came in 1999. John F. Kennedy Jr., the son of President Kennedy, and Jacqueline, was often called America's Prince. He was handsome, charismatic, and popular. Many believed he might follow the family path into politics. But in July 1999, while flying his small airplane to a wedding, the plane crashed into the Atlantic Ocean near Martha's Vineyard. John Jr., his wife Carolyn, and her sister all died. He was only 38 years old. The news shocked the world. For many, it confirmed that the Kennedy family curse was real. Other members of the family also faced struggles, accidents, health problems, or public scandals. It seemed that fame and fortune could not protect them from pain. While most families experience loss, the number of deaths and tragedies in the Kennedys made their story stand out. For Americans, each new Kennedy tragedy felt personal. Newspaper and television covered their lives as if they were a royal family. People admired their charm and service, but also mourned their pain. By the late 1990s, the Kennedys had become symbols of both American greatness and American sorrow. The story of later generations showed that the so-called curse did not stop with John and Robert. It continued to shape the family across the decades. With every loss, the legend of the Kennedy curse grew stronger, leaving people to wonder if destiny itself was against them. Part 6: Legacy and Reflection. Today, the Kennedy family remains one of the most famous families in America. Their story is told in books, films, and documentaries. For many people, the name Kennedy still brings images of power, charm, and tragedy. Despite all the loss, the Kennedys also left behind a strong legacy of service. John F. Kennedy is remembered as a president who inspired hope, asked Americans to serve their country, and guided the nation through dangerous times. Robert Kennedy is remembered as a man who spoke for justice, equality, and peace. Ted Kennedy, even with his scandals, became known as the Lion of the Senate for his long career and dedication to public policy. Other family members also continued the tradition. Caroline Kennedy, the daughter of JFK, became an ambassador and author. Many of the younger Kennedys have worked in law, education, or charity. The family name still carries weight in American politics and culture. But alongside this legacy, the idea of the Kennedy curse remains. The list of tragedies is long: assassinations, accidents, illnesses, and scandals. Few other families have experienced so many losses in such a public way. To some people, the curse is just a way to explain a series of unlucky events. To others, it feels like destiny, as if greatness always comes with a price. The Kennedys are often compared to royalty. They had wealth, beauty, and influence. Their lives played out on the front pages of newspapers, just like kings and queens of old. But like tragic heroes in stories, they also faced downfall and sorrow. This mixture of light and darkness is what keeps people fascinated. In the end, the Kennedy family shows both sides of the American dream. They rose from immigrant roots to the highest office in the land. They inspired millions with their words and actions. But they also remind us that no family, no matter how rich or powerful, can escape human pain and loss. The legacy of the Kennedys is not only about a curse, it is also about courage, service, and resilience. They teach us that, even in the face of tragedy, people can continue to work for a better world. And perhaps that is why the name Kennedy will never be forgotten.